Our victory that day halted the advance of the fascist oppressors. We stopped them, delayed them, which forced them to face the brutal winter to come.
But at what cost? You were always willing to sacrifice so many brave men. Were their lives really so cheap?
I did not have the luxury to agonize over every soldier I sent to die. They understood what was at stake, and their bravery bought us the time we needed to do what was necessary.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Sir Cypher here. Let's play Company Heroes 2, Mission 4, The Miraculous Winter. Though, winter happens every year in the Soviet Union. It's not that much of a miracle. But it was a very cold winter.
We risk freezing to death. Look for fires or structures along our path.
Look at these tracks. Fritz has been this way. There must be a camp nearby.
There are no cowards here.
So,
Your orders, comrade.
this is a winter map. Now, winter maps are kind of...
It's in my bones now.
He's freezing to death. Are kind of a core gimmick of Company Heroes 2.
We can warm ourselves by that fire. These Germans will not mind.
Whereas if you're in a winter map and most types of troops aren't near fire, they freeze to death.
I think we can all agree we are freezing our balls off out here. Huh? But then, so are the fascists. We will take advantage of this weather and drive the Germans out of the area around Moscow. They've pulled back to defensive positions somewhere around here. Scouts are moving into position here. You will rendezvous with them and provide demolition support. We have limited forces, comrades. Stay warm and stay alive.
So as you can see, it's snowing. There's also some multiplayer maps like this. I don't think they get played very often competitively because, again, it's a little bit of a gimmick. But yeah, you have to stay by fire or inside buildings or units will freeze to death. So we have a limited number of troops, so we have to be kind of careful here. So I guess this map is this mission is supposed to represent basically the Germans made it basically all the way to Moscow. And the several German commanders were like, hey, we should pull back to further back to Germany so we have better supply lines for the winter, have more defensible positions, have winter clothing. And basically Hitler said no because he had in mind Napoleon's invasion of Russia in when it was 1814 or something, 1812, whenever he did it with the Grand Armée. And Napoleon made it to Moscow. The Russians burnt it down. The French retreated, although it wasn't just the French. It was basically all of Europe. They retreated. And the Russians just murdered them. Murdered them as they retreated. Oh man, I'm having really bad luck on my conscripts this time. So we have some snipers coming up to help us. Jeez, only have 2 conscripts left.
Good. We thought you might have frozen to death.
Not from this little breeze. This cold is nothing.
Now hurry and warm yourselves. We need to scout the German position.
Going where I am needed. Moving. Step on the move.
So yeah, Hitler thought that if they retreated, they would get destroyed in the retreat. So he basically told everybody to hunker down where they were and wait for spring. So we got to go clear out of this stuff, but there's some friends we can pick up first.
Hold your fire. We do not want to give our position away.
You have a need.
Oh, we got all dudes this time. Sniper teams have a random chance to be female snipers. But
Sir, we had to take shelter from the cold, but we are ready to aid your effort. The cold has crippled the German tanks. Explosives can ensure they stay that way.
Going where I am needed.
Engineer standing by. Get inside.
but yes, we got all dudes this time.
Ready for your order.
I was actually kind of reading up on some of this history, and it's interesting to see the German accounts of
That, you sucking sin.
Russian combat troops. Ooh. Basically, all the Allied powers used women to some extent in the war, whether it was in factories or to man anti-aircraft guns or all sorts of things. But the Soviets used them in frontline combat, and it was kind of, according to German diaries and stuff, it was kind of unnerving because they weren't really there. They weren't really psychologically prepared to, I don't know, bayonet and kill women. And the Soviet female soldiers were definitely psychologically prepared to bayonet and kill the Germans who were invading. So they were supposedly relatively effective in combat. All right, so we'll pick up this machine gun. I'm not going to pick up this heavy machine gun.
Sniper ready.
Now, because Company of Heroes is a game that has quite a bit of randomness to it, this mission might end up a little difficult because we can't really control how well our guys do to a certain extent. If the enemies get lucky hits, they get lucky hits. So we'll keep these guys here because they're not going to accomplish much. One side note, another thing I was reading on Red Army, like infantry squad doctrine.
Comrade Lieutenant, we
Get
took
back in
cover
there.
in this house when we heard gunfire, but we are ready to serve. Let's get going, comrade.
And one of the interesting things is, I always thought the Molotov cocktails were kind of a improvised thing, but they're actually in like the squad manuals, like in the doctrine. It's like, what do you do if you come across an enemy tank? Because the Red Army didn't really have infantry held close combat weapons, so they're basically like, you close with it and you destroy it with rifles, hand grenades, and fire bombs, and presumably like anti-tank mines. And also it talks otherwhere about how the firebomb is like okay, what are you doing? Get back over to your little fire. How the firebomb is kind of just a normal weapon to be used.
Acknowledged.
Okay, so let's see here.
Relocating. Move orders acknowledged. Comrade, I am on the way.
Okay.
Now they cannot hide in the shadows. Going where I am needed. Da, tovarish.
Let's see
German
here.
outpost is nearby. We can move to cover to camouflage our approach. We can put up a flare from here to scout out the enemy approach. The Germans are just ahead. If we move into that cover, we should be in range.
Displacing. Safety's on. Move orders.
This is always just so dicey. See, in Company of Heroes 2, snipers were individual, and here snipers are in teams
I am waiting.
because Snipers are more effective in teams. You know, you have a high magnification lens. You know, you can't really see that well. Uh-oh.
What on the move?
Jesus Christ.
What? Sniper moving right away.
Run.
Sniper taking fire.
Run, 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 run. Run, 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 run.
Run!
Ah.
Moving now. I am on the way.
Run, 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 run.
Going where I am needed.
Ah, come on. Where'd those guys go? Uh-oh. Because, you know, you have a telescopic... Maybe they'll just freeze to death out here. If you have a telescopic lens, it's very hard to see anything around you. It's like if you've ever looked through a telescope trying to look at stars or moons or anything.
In motion.
You have typically you have a wider angle lens and a shorter lens because it's very hard to see because you have no reference point. So you know you have a sniper who's looking through their telephoto lens, and then you have a spotter who has like a wider angle binoculars who can point at things and tell you what to shoot at.
On the move.
So yeah, if one of the peoples dies, then the sniper will still be around and keep shooting. So it also makes the squads, I guess, a little more durable.
Orders acknowledged.
Let's see.
In motion.
Jeez.
Let us see what we have here.
So we don't get any reinforcements until we clear this base. So you kind of have to be very, very sneaky. Oh god. Oh god. Run, 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 run.
Go!
Run!
Going.
Run, 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 run.
I am on the way. This
Oh
place
god, run. Run!
relocating. Standing by. I am on the way. Infantry shooting at us.
No, 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 no.
You want us not going hunting? Nothing will stand in my way.
Let's let the house tank it here.
Comrade. Fire! Picking off.
Okay.
Going where I've taken out a squad.
But I guess to get back to what I was originally talking about 15 minutes ago. This is a long mission. So one of the reasons I was reading up on stuff is so I'd have things to talk about. But anyway, the
On the move.
uh,
How can I going to location?
hopefully that guy freezes to death. But yeah, the Russian army, the German army decided to make winter camp outside of Moscow,
Enemy squad is down.
and they didn't have proper supplies. They couldn't get proper supplies in the
In motion.
in the winter. They were thousands of miles away from Berlin. And the Russians had basically, this whole time they were retreating, they were also building up a counterattacking force of their most modern tanks, so T-34s, KV-1s, and specialist troops like mountain troops and snow troops that they basically just smashed the Germans outside of Moscow and in the snow, and basically harried them and chased them, halfway back towards Germany. I think you can. I think it's not hard to see that the Russians learned a lot from the Winter War, which is a war that is not that commonly, I guess, maybe known about. It obviously, I'm sure, is very commonly known about if you're Finnish, or maybe if you're Russian, or you're one of those, if you're nearby one of those areas. But basically, the Germany and the Soviet Union had a non-aggression pact at the start of the war, where they basically agreed to split up Poland, which is, was not a very nice thing for anybody to do to Poland. And so Germany took half, and then Soviet Union took the other half. And then as part of that, to kind of just tick off a few more boxes, the Soviet Union decided to take Finland. And Finland just destroyed them. Finland, there were just thousands and thousands of casualties, tens of thousands of casualties by the Finnish. The Russians were just not prepared to fight that war. Some people think it's because of Stalin's purges of the Red Army Officer Corps, that they just didn't no longer had the professional ability to fight that kind of war. But Germans lost terribly. They had to call it off, essentially. The Russians lost terribly. They called it off, and they tried again later, and they did a little better in something called the Continuation War, after they pushed back Germany. But yeah, I think you can. It's not hard to imagine that they learned a lot from that conflict. Okay, let's see here. Oop. Uh-oh. Run away. A lot of micro here. A lot of just running up and shooting them and then running away again. Uh-oh. Some people think that one of the things that influenced Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union was how just poorly that the Soviet Union performed during the Winter War. It's not hard to imagine that, no offense to the Finnish, but Finland's not a very populous country, and it's kind of easy to make the assumption, well, if they couldn't take on Finland, that has like 1/50th of their population and 1 probably 100th of their industrial power, then we're gonna just destroy them. But that was not the case. While the Red Army was initially sort of surprised because Stalin, for some reason, even though he was very paranoid, seemed to trust the one person that you should definitely not trust, which is Adolf Hitler. Okay.
We put extra squads at your disposal to aid your efforts.
Oh, let's get these little guys here.
There should be another German depot near here. Here we go.
Uh-oh.
Moving to location.
Where's the little house? Ah. I smell a mission briefing. Nope. Okay.
You need something demolished? Guard squad ready. I do not mind. I point out problems.
Okay, so we got a unit of guards rifles. The secondary objective is to blow up these tanks. So we'll do that.
Occupy that structure.
Engineer standing by.
Just gonna put these guys in here to warm up for a second.
You need something built?
But yeah, the
You need something demolished? Engineer
Germans got stalled very heavily. While the Germans obviously did very well in the first year of the war, the problem is that, in order to win, you essentially either have to kill literally everyone, or they have to surrender. And if they're not going to surrender, you know, you're left with a position of like, you can take as much of Russia and the Soviet Union as you want, but if they're not going to surrender, then you have to keep going. And there's only so far you can go in a year before winter hits. And they couldn't go far enough. I mean, and even if they could, right? I mean, I don't know. Right, the Soviet Union could keep traveling backwards all the way back to Siberia. So it was kind of a difficult proposition. One interesting thing that I was also sort of reading about in preparation for this is sort of the one hope that some people think that Germany and the Wehrmacht had to win this war was to actually come as liberators, because a lot of people in the Soviet Union didn't want to be in the Soviet Union. You know, countries like, you know, Ukraine or Belarusia, or, you know, just there's quite a few Eastern European countries, especially ones that had suffered terribly from sort of Stalin's 5-year plans and mechanization and stuff, that actually in parts greeted the Wehrmacht when it rolled in. But the problem was, and Hitler was very explicit about this, you know, they weren't going to Russia to just take over a country. They were going to basically clear it for what they viewed as German settlers. So like the people there were either going to essentially be slaves or just like pushed out or liquidated. So while there was some initial happiness in some places, because they were like, oh great, now we can be free, right? Or at least maybe we can be part of Germany, and hopefully Germany is better run than the Soviet Union. But it soon became apparent that they had no interest in doing that. Okay, so let's see. We got to blow up these tanks, but I don't have enough munitions. Okay. So let's go up here. Let's sneak up here. Let's see what we got. So yeah, you have to forgive me a little bit for well, you need 2 people to crew it.
Fresh conscripts have arrived.
If this is taking a little while, because all it takes is one bad move and then they kill your snipers, and then you have to do the whole mission over. Because really, we have unlimited conscripts, but they're not very useful. We really have to get snipers. Have to use the snipers to kill everyone.
Conscripts here.
All right.
Moving out. This is better than walking.
We have more conscripts at our
Let's get
disposal.
some additional
We have more
conscripts.
conscripts at our disposal.
Departing.
So in this game, you can also steal vehicles. Sometimes when vehicles are destroyed,
We can commandeer
they
the
won't
contract
actually
to
be
aid our troops.
destroyed. They'll just be
Join that squad.
they'll just be disabled basically, and you can put infantry in them and recrew them, and then you can repair them. So it could be your vehicles, it could be their vehicles. I'm not sure entirely what the percentage is. I think it also is determined by what kind of way the vehicle is destroyed.
You need something good? Standing by. You need something demolished?
So yeah, in some ways, I feel like this is fairly. If this sort of thing is fairly an accurate scenario, is this drama probably played out 1,000 different times all over the Eastern Front as do I have enough? Yeah, I have enough to blow this thing up now. Where German garrisons were just huddled, you know, in encampments places. On some days, in some parts of Russia, it hit like I think -50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very cold. And you know, even if there's Russians out there stalking you and picking off your people, you're not gonna go out there and try and find them because it's too cold. Tanks wouldn't work. You know, guns would frost up and stop working. Planes couldn't fly. And the whole time you have the Red Army stalking around in the snow. Okay, where's my... Oh, engineer squad. Stalking around, killing people.
Standing by.
Alright, so now we have an armored car. Okay, so we'll put this here. We'll put these guys here. Where's my machine gun team? Machine gun engineers.
Sniper in motion. Moving.
I want the machine gun team to be first because,
Standing by. Move out.
okay.
Off track. Relocating.
Let's see what we got here. Nope. So machine guns aren't gonna do much to a half track. I'm trying to kind of lure them out because if I can get them away from behind the bunker, I can lure them over to my snipers. Now, these guys have Panzerfaust, so we have to be a little bit careful. Panzerfausts are the disposable late war German anti-tank weapon. Basic. Okay, and they have Panzer Shreks. So they are very anachronistic in this setting. No side. This is supposed to be late 1941. There were no combatants in the war who had uh-oh. I don't want to move. Okay, whatever. You know what? Those engineers died. It's an unfortunate thing, but that's why we have conscripts to that's why we have conscripts here. Just pick up their guns. Oh, no, you get back in there. Just pick up their guns, get back inside. Okay, so I should repair that. No side in the war had real portable anti-tank weapons at the start of the war. Basically, at the start of the war, the sort of main anti-tank weapon that most sides were using was something that was the equivalent to a high-velocity 37mm cannon, which was perfectly adequate to go through most early war tanks. But and then beyond that, you had at sort of a, and also it was small enough that infantry could just scoot it around themselves, just like on a little cart. And then to support that, you'd have things like anti-tank rifles and anti-tank grenades and anti-tank mines. And it was sort of thought, well, those can handle like armored cars and things, and then beyond that, we'll have the 37mm. But it became very clear very early on that there's way more tanks than anybody sort of, I guess, reasonably expected there to be. And they were much more concentrated than anyone expected to be. And so the, infantry sections or infantry divisions and infantry units were coming up against huge numbers of tanks because they were very concentrated. And, they had to develop stuff. So first you had like more anti-tank rifles and things, but those really just weren't effective. They made bigger guns, like 50mm anti-tank guns, and then the Americans developed the bazooka, which is, you know, very famous, and which is basically a aircraft rocket, you know, put into a metal tube, and that came out in, I think, early 1942, something like that, and they gave them to the Russians for Lend-Lease to use. Oh, somebody was sneaking over there, and the Germans captured them, and then they reverse engineered it into the Panzer Schreck, which is like a sort of a better, larger bazooka. And then they also came up with the Panzer Faust, which is sort of a one-shot shaped charge thing as well. The British came up with the Piat, which is another shaped charge weapon that basically kind of almost... It's this kind of weird contraption. It's called a spigot mortar, but it almost looks... you can almost think of it like a bomb that gets shot out of a thing on like a spring almost. It's sort of wacky, but it doesn't make any noise, and it's you know, you could shoot it like in enclosed areas and stuff. I think the Russians were really the only ones to never come up with or widely use a handheld like a handheld like a anti-tank weapon that was effective at distance. I think that's partially because they had American bazookas from Lend-Lease. I think it's partially because they normally outnumbered German armor, and they often had better armor and more concentrated armor than the Germans did. And also just because, I don't know, I think they just thought anti-tank mines were good enough. And if you ever go visit some place like the Tank Museum in where is it? Birmingham, wherever the Tank Museum is in oh god, stupid Panzer Shreks. No, leave my poor half-track alone. If you ever do visit the Tank Museum, though, it's in England. It's in southern England. And you'll notice that a lot of the German tanks have this sort of like concrete-looking like stuff on the outside instead of being smooth. And that was this paste they put on because they thought it would help for Russians trying to put magnetic mines on the tanks, like it would the magnetic sort of mines that the infantry would run up and slap on a tank, that they wouldn't be able to stick and they would fall off. And that was sort of the Russian thing. Let's see. But anyway, this is supposed to be 1941. Nobody should have any. The only anti-tank weapons that should really be in use here that infantry can carry are anti-tank grenades and anti-tank rifles. All right, sneaking up here. Kill them. Kill it. Kill this stupid Panzer Shrek. Okay. Whew. Okay. Someone asked me a question and they're like, did the Russians, or not the Russians, because the Soviet Union was made up a lot more of just the Russians, did the Soviet Union actually have like better equipment than the Germans when Operation Barbarossa started. And I would argue, yeah, in a lot of cases, yeah, they did. And the Germans just had surprise. They had better doctrine, and they had better coordination. They also had better training. You know, the Wehrmacht at this point in the war was the same Wehrmacht that had blitzkrieged Poland and France and you know, Belgium, and so they 100% knew what they were doing. A lot of the best Soviet commanders were killed in purges and things or imprisoned. So the Red Army was, you know, did not have a high morale. They really hadn't tested a lot of their doctrine. And a lot of their stuff just got destroyed before it could even really get put into use because, you know, they were surprised and they just didn't really coordinate. One of the few recordings, and I actually think it's sort of interesting. I highly suggest everybody check it out. But the few non-speech audio recordings of Adolf Hitler is him talking to one of his generals, I think in like either Denmark or somewhere like that, Finland. He's talking to some diplomat, and he's basically saying like, this just how crazy it is, how much stuff that the Soviet Union has, how many tanks. And he's like, you know, they have like, so like just the Red Army when the war started had something like 25,000 tanks. And a lot of them were old and crappy, but you know, they still had that many. And when the Soviet Union, or when the Wehrmacht went in, they went in with 3,500 tanks. And like just a statistic, but so the Wehrmacht invaded the Soviet Union with 3.5 million men. Okay, so that's a lot of people, right? And they went in with 3,500 tanks, or something to that amount, which seems not that many, and 700,000 horses. So, you know, the vast majority of the Wehrmacht was walking. And, you know, so yeah, the tanks go and do all these crazy encirclements and the armored columns and all that stuff, but like the vast majority of the troops still have to walk there, you know, they still have to hoof it. So you know, it's understandable how you know, they couldn't make their goals, because they really were not as mechanized and advanced and powerful as propaganda and kind of modern sort of mythology has made them out to be. And they just did it because they were really motivated. They were very well trained. They had very good doctrine. They thought a lot about how to use armored vehicles. And they fought against people who they either had completely outclassed, like, you know, no offense to Poland, but like Poland, which just did not have the population or the industrial base to stop them, or France, which basically got outplayed on a strategy scale, and you know, just essentially gave up because they didn't want to fight another terrible war like World War I. But yeah, I know the Russians had the KV-1, which even up until the end of the war was a formidable heavy tank. They had the T-34 at the start of the war. They had decent rifles and squad-based weapons, decent submachine guns, but they just had a really bad. Okay, let's see here. Let you guys get out. But they just had they were just really unprepared. They didn't use their stuff right, and it really hurt them. Okay, so we got half track number 2. Okay, why don't you guys go on that half track? Where's my other squad of engineers? Oh. You guys going there. You guys going there. You guys going there. So I think there's another tank I've got to blow up somewhere over here. But yeah, the one kind of non-speech recording of Hitler, he's basically like, you know, they told me they told me they had all this stuff, like my intelligence, and I didn't believe them. Like if I had known they actually had that much stuff, like I wouldn't have done it essentially. So, but you know, they did have that much stuff, and for all of the encirclements and crazy stuff that the Germans did, they were losing troops while they were doing it too, and they were losing their best troops, the ones that had all the training, that had all of the let's see, blow this thing up, that you know, had all the morale, had been through all the other campaigns, and they didn't have the industrial capability to get them back all up to strength, and they didn't have the population, because even up until like basically the very end of the war, Germany didn't use women as factories. Russia was already doing it, using women as factories before the war, and they were using women in combat. So beyond the fact that Russia was a bigger country, they also essentially had double what they would have otherwise, because every woman they could either use in a factory or a combat position. Okay, so we're going to sneak over here. There is another tank over here that we can just sneak over here and blow up. Their little half-track squad. So most people think that this first year of the war was Germany's only real possible chance to win it. And when they basically got harassed all through the winter and lost most of their best troops, and sort of just retread Napoleon's footsteps, that after that, you know, despite all of the craziness of Stalingrad and Kursk and all these other things that I'm sure this game is going to show, they're basically were just living on borrowed time, because you know that the Soviet Union was more than a match for them, and that you know, it was only a matter of time before the Western Allies committed a landing somewhere, and they were fighting a war on two fronts. Potential History, who is a YouTube history person, has a good series on has a good episode on how Germany could have won the war, and it's basically like, well, they couldn't have. Like, there's no way. Like, the only way they could have won the war was by doing certain things that they just weren't gonna do because they're Nazis. I mean, or at least not everybody in Germany was a Nazi, but the leadership of the country were Nazis. And essentially the only reason they started the war is because they were Nazis. They had a non-aggression pact with Russia. So so they're going to make, if they're Nazis, they're going to make Nazi decisions, trying to essentially exterminate the entire Slavic population of Eastern Europe and Russia. And as long as they're making those kind of decisions, they're not going to be able to win the war. Okay, so now we're sneaking over to our last spot. I think we've done a pretty good job so far. Our troops are all cozy in our little stolen German half-tracks. So, let's see here. So one thing to worry about is if you're on the ice and the ice gets hit by explosion, your troops can just fall in and die. Like the ice will break. So I'm going to try and avoid that. There's a little sniper den here that I can put my troops in. I can put my snipers in and try and kill off some of these people. So this is German. This is a Stug, but unfortunately, so Stugs were the most common armored vehicle. I don't think there's anything you can do to let it not get away. Maybe there's something really sneaky, like you can put a bomb in front of it or something and blow it up when it drives over. But anyway, Stugs were the most common armored vehicle of the war, and Stug 3s were the most common Stug. And they're basically just a Panzer III, and they chop the gun off and put a bigger gun on it. Can I hit that? Can I hit it? Why can't I hit it? Huh? Why can't I hit this thing? Shoot it. Oh. I guess I can hit it. Why aren't these guys shooting at it? So cover is directional in Company of Heroes. Like if you're in this bunker, you can't shoot at people back here because it's just wood. But like, he's right there. I don't know. Seems a little odd. Okay, so maybe I'll put these guys. So yeah, the problem is that there are mortars there, and if I go across here, the mortars are gonna shoot at me. So, and then they'll hit the ice, and then my people will fall in the ice, and it's gonna be very sad. There'll be sad times. We'll see what happens here, though. Huh. Maybe I can lure some of these people out. I can't just like 100% like harass these people, because hopefully they follow me, because they probably have Panzer. Yep. Speaking of Panzerfaust, no, leave my poor half track alone. Oh God, no! Everybody get out! No. Okay, so that was what we like to call in the business a little oopsie poopsie. Okay, get in the house, you dipshits.
Another vehicle has been lost in the
Okay,
defense
get in
of
the house.
Medina.
Okay. Oh, it won't fit? Okay, get in there. Okay, so a little oopsie there.
Fresh conscripts have arrived.
So a little bit of an oopsie there. Okay, the only problem is we kind of have to leapfrog our conscripts, because if you just tell them to move over here, they'll freeze to death before they get close. Oh God, I didn't want to lose that half track. Guess that's what I get from my hubris for not retreating backwards.
We have more conscripts at our disposal.
Okay. Go to that fire there. Although it was a very cold winter. I think it's
On the march.
a little bit over exaggerated how quickly troops freeze.
Da, tovarish.
Also, if my keyboard is a little clicky, I apologize. I spilled an adult beverage on my regular keyboard prior to filming this, so I had to get my clicky keyboard, which my wife's not gonna like because it keeps her up with its clicking at night. But yeah, forgive me for just talking about history and stuff the whole time. I am a big fan
Set up in there.
of history, and also I feel like to a certain extent, if you don't talk about history, or if I didn't have something to talk about, this would be a very even longer than it is already, because
We are on the way.
oh, let's see what I want. I want the light machine guns.
Fascists will die even faster.
Because
We are away. Garrison that structure. Occupy that structure.
because it's just so long. There's not that much happens. It's kind of a boring. Oh my god, my cats are fighting each other. It's kind of a little bit of a boring mission in this respect, because one wrong move, and you lose something, as you saw there, very valuable, like a like a half track. So now I don't want to just capture this. Whoa! How did they even see my snipers here? Jesus Christ. Man, I'm bad at this game.
Standing by. Our truck is moving now.
One less machine awaiting orders. Take them out.
We need orders. Let this half truck out.
So I can, if I move my half track right here, the machine gun shouldn't be able to shoot me, because it's just wood there. Oh no, I can't believe I lost my half track, my sniper too. This is so terrible.
HMG silenced.
We have more conscripts at
Oh, and I think I accidentally left my conscripts out there to freeze to death. So the reason why I'm going through all this nonsense, all this bully-hoo, is that
Standing by.
a scripted series of events happens once you capture this area, and essentially it's going to be very, very annoying if we don't properly prepare.
We have more conscripts at our
And part of proper repairing would have been not losing my not losing my second half track, but you know, hey, life's not fair.
Come on, comrades.
Also, not having my snipers get killed by
Get inside.
not having my snipers get killed by
Garrison structure.
mortars.
Unload.
Okay, so we'll put these conscripts here,
You need something built?
and then we'll put these guys
In that building, men.
here,
Yes, comrade. Half truck relocating.
and then
Waiting for your command.
okay, we gotta go maybe like here.
Awaiting orders.
Oh, I actually forgot about these conscripts. Okay, where should I put these conscripts? Maybe this actually here, this building here. That actually might be a good spot for them.
Men are no. Enter the building. Set up in there.
Warm up in this little bunker.
Grab your things. We are
All
leaving.
right,
On our way.
let's go.
Get inside.
Oh, there's another half track here. Oh, I never realized that. Oh, interesting. Okay, well then, can take this half track.
Climb in, comrades. Moving to location. Forward, comrades. Check your gear.
We'll get cozy here. I just don't want to capture that thing.
Better than walking.
I never noticed there was another half track here. Well, I guess it's my lucky day. So we'll do that.
Conscripts inside. Outside, men.
We'll repair this half track.
Repairs are necessary.
You know, this attack is not actually going to be that dramatic, so I think you're going to think I was overreacting a little bit, but I just spent like an hour sneaking around this map, and I don't want to do it again. So I'm going to be very careful. Let's see. Okay, so now we steal a mortar. We're going to put one half track here. And one half track here. And then we'll bring the mortars here. We'll merge these guys with the mortars. The real danger is they seem to just make a beeline for your mortars.
Comrade Lieutenant, scouts report German reinforcements approaching our position.
It's a terrible German
Man
accent.
those mortars. We will bring hell down on them.
The problem is
We
like
must hold the region at any cost.
they really hate mortars, and they're gonna like make a complete beeline for these mortars and try and kill them.
What do you need?
It is very annoying. Maybe I can pre-crack the ice here. Get it a little ready for the tank.
Mortar ready for order. We are taking fire!
Oh boy. So the reason they make such a big deal about the mortars is a German Stug 3 is going to come up the river, and you have to kill it in a very specific way, which is by hitting with mortars so it falls to the ice. And all of the Germans seem to know where your mortars are. Oh god. And they're gonna make a beeline for it.
A squad of infantry has been
So
Death before retreat.
There's a German Stug coming up the river. Now we're fucked.
Arrive.
We can drown it. Quick, barrage the river with the mortars.
yeah,
Break
we're
the
barraging
ice.
the river with the
Sink that
mortars.
fascist tank.
Okay, well those guys fell in the water. Come
The
on.
enemy is encroaching on our territory.
Okay, how many freaking mortar barrage does it take to sink a freaking
Another
tank?
vehicle has been lost in the defense of the Rodina.
Okay, where's my conscripts?
We have more conscripts at our disposal.
There we go.
Good shot! Sent the bastards to an icy grave. Look at the Germans run. They aren't so tough without their tank.
It's not a tank, it's an armored gun vehicle. Doesn't have a turret.
If General Winter helped us at Moscow, it was simply because his hand found more Germans than Russians.
No. It was the courage and sacrifice of the Red Army and the Soviet people that bled and slowed the enemy. Fascists would have been warming themselves in a burning Moscow had we not fought so fiercely before the snows came.
Alright, mission complete. Thank you for watching, everyone. Hopefully, through watching this ordeal, you understand some of the pain of the people fighting in the winter of 1941. Well, anyway, thank you for watching and have a nice day.